She was supposed to be a bride. Instead, she became a weapon. On the night before her wedding, Elara Whitcomb discovered that love was a lie sold to foolish women, and she'd bought it at full price. Her fiancé didn't just abandon her, he traded her, like livestock, like damaged goods with an expiration date. But here's the thing about a woman with nothing left to lose. She stops playing by rules written by men who underestimated her. This is the story of how a discarded bride became a duchess feared across 3 kingdoms. Stick around until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The rain came down like nails. Elara stood in the courtyard of Thornfield Manor, her silk wedding gown already ruined, watching the last carriage pull away. Not hers. Never hers. The Ashford family crest gleamed on the door panel even as mud splattered across it. Inside, she could make out 2 silhouettes pressed together, her former fiancé Marcus and the Bellamy heiress, the woman whose dowry apparently made Elara's 5-year engagement worth less than yesterday's garbage. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold, though the October storm had soaked through to her skin. Not from heartbreak, though that was there too, a dull blade lodging itself between her ribs every time she tried to breathe. No. Elara Whitcomb was shaking from pure, incandescent rage. "Miss Whitcomb," she turned. Thornfield's head butler stood in the doorway, his face carefully blank in that way servants perfected when they witnessed their employer's humiliations. He held an umbrella but made no move to bring it to her. Of course not. She wasn't family anymore. Wasn't even a guest. She was a problem to be removed before the scandal spread further than it already had. "Your belongings have been packed," he continued, each word precise and cutting. "Lord Ashford requests that you vacate the premises within the hour." Requests. The laugh that escaped her throat sounded wrong, fractured. How polite of him. "Miss Whitcomb, it's midnight, in a storm." She gestured at the empty courtyard, at the gates already being closed by footmen eager to lock her out. "Where exactly does Lord Ashford imagine I should go?" The butler's expression didn't change. "That is no longer Lord Ashford's concern." There it was. The truth stripped of pretense. She had been useful once, her family's minor noble status, her mother's connections, her own carefully cultivated reputation as a suitable match. But the Whitcomb fortune had crumbled over the past year. Bad investments, her father's gambling debts, a series of catastrophic decisions that turned their name from respectable to merely tolerated. And Marcus Ashford, 3rd son of a powerful family, had found a better deal. "I see." Elara straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of pride she didn't know she still possessed. "Then I suppose I should collect my things." She walked past the butler. Her ruined slippers squelching against marble floors, she'd once imagined herself walking as a bride. 24 hours ago, she'd stood in the morning room with Marcus's mother, discussing flower arrangements. Lady Ashford had smiled at her, had called her dear girl, had made promises about family and belonging that turned out to be worth exactly nothing. The room they'd given her, allowed her temporarily, was on the 3rd floor. Small. Barely better than servants' quarters. She told herself it was charming, that it showed humility, that once she married Marcus they'd have the entire East Wing. Stupid. So unbelievably stupid. Her trunks were already packed, stacked by the door, like evidence at a crime scene. Someone had been efficient. Probably the same maids who'd helped her dress this morning, who'd woven flowers into her hair and told her how beautiful she looked. Had they known? Had everyone known except her? Elara grabbed the smallest case, the one with her mother's jewelry, the few pieces that hadn't been sold yet, and left everything else. Let them have it. Let them auction off her dresses and shoes and all the careful trappings of a life that had been built on sand. The storm had gotten worse. Lightning cracked across the sky as she stepped back outside, illuminating the courtyard in stark flashes of white. The gates were closed now, locked. Because of course they were. "You'll have to use the service entrance," a voice called from somewhere above. One of the footmen, watching from a window, making sure she actually left. The service entrance led to a narrow alley that opened onto the main road. Elara had never used it before. Ladies didn't. But she wasn't a lady anymore, was she? She was something else now. Something undefined and dangerous and so far beyond the borders of acceptable society that there wasn't even a word for it. Jilted? No. That implied a lover's quarrel, a broken heart that time might heal, discarded. That was closer. The road stretched empty in both directions, slick with rain and completely deserted. No carriages for hire at this hour, not in this part of the city. Her family's townhouse was 3 miles away, but she couldn't go there. Her father would be drunk, her mother hysterical, and neither of them would have solutions. They'd expected her marriage to save them all, to bring Ashford money and influence into their failing household. Now there was nothing. Elara started walking. The rain plastered her hair to her skull, turned her once white gown into a gray, clinging shroud. Her feet ached. Her case grew heavier with each step. But she kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging the full scope of what had just happened. She'd been erased. In the span of a single evening, 5 years of her life had been declared worthless. Every letter Marcus had written, every promise, every careful plan, gone. And in the morning, the news would spread. The Whitcomb girl, abandoned on her wedding eve, the gossip would be vicious. Other families would distance themselves. Marriage prospects would evaporate. Her younger sister's chances would be ruined by association. Her father would blame her. He always did. Should have been more charming, he'd say, whiskey-slurred and bitter. Should have kept his interest. As if this was somehow her failure. As if she hadn't spent 5 years molding herself into exactly what Marcus said he wanted. Demure, accomplished, decorative, but not too opinionated, interesting but not challenging. She'd succeeded so well she'd bored him into betrayal. The road curved through a section of old-growth forest, trees creating a canopy that offered some relief from the rain but made the darkness absolute. Elara's breathing echoed too loud in her own ears. Fear started to creep in at the edges of her anger, a woman alone, at night, in an area where robberies weren't uncommon. Hoofbeats. She spun around, clutching her case like a weapon. A carriage was approaching, moving fast despite the conditions. No lanterns. Just a black shape cutting through the storm, like something out of a nightmare. Elara stepped off the road, pressing herself against a tree trunk. Wealthy families didn't travel at night without lights, unless they had reasons to avoid attention. Smugglers, maybe, or... The carriage stopped, directly in front of her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Rain drummed against the roof. The horses stamped and snorted, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Then the door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, dark coat that looked expensive even in the minimal light. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether he belonged somewhere. Miss Whitcomb. Not a question. He knew who she was. Elara's grip tightened on her case. I don't know you. No. He stepped closer, and lightning flashed, giving her a glimpse of his face, sharp features, cold eyes, a mouth set in something that wasn't quite a smile. But I know you, or rather, I know what happened to you tonight. My condolences. The word dripped with something that definitely wasn't sympathy. Who are you? Lucien Viramont. He said it like she should recognize the name. She did. Everyone did. The Duke of Viramont was a legend whispered about in drawing rooms and servants' quarters alike. He'd inherited his title at 19 after his father's mysterious death, had consolidated power across 3 provinces by the time he was 25, and was rumored to have connections to everything from Parliament to the criminal enterprises that ran the city's underbelly. People didn't meet the Duke of Viramont. They were summoned by him, or they were destroyed by him, or, if they were very lucky, they simply never appeared on his radar at all. What do you want? Elara heard herself ask. I have a proposition. Lucien pulled something from his coat pocket, an envelope sealed with black wax. But first, let's get you out of the rain. You're no good to me dead from pneumonia. I'm not getting in that carriage. Yes, you are. No threat in his tone, just certainty. Because you're cold, wet, abandoned, and you have nowhere else to go. Your family's townhouse is being watched by creditors. Your friends, he made a dismissive gesture, will pretend not to know you when you come calling. And every door in polite society just locked itself against you. So you'll get in the carriage, Miss Whitcomb, because I'm the only person in this city offering you anything besides pity or scorn. She should refuse, should run, should... Elara climbed into the carriage. The interior was as she'd expected, dark leather, rich wood, everything understated and expensive. Lucien settled across from her, and she realized with a jolt that they were alone. No chaperone, no servants. In any other context, this would be scandalous enough to finish whatever was left of her reputation. As if she had anything left to lose. "You're wondering why I'm here," Lucian said, arranging the envelope on the seat beside him. "How I knew where to find you, whether this is coincidence or design." Design? Elara heard the steadiness in her own voice with some surprise. "You were waiting for me. Smart." He nodded, something like approval flashing across his features. "I've been tracking the Ashford situation for weeks. Knew Marcus was negotiating with the Bellamys. Knew when they'd reached an agreement. Knew he'd dispose of you tonight, though I'll admit I expected him to at least wait until morning before throwing you out. The man has even less spine than I credited. Why do you care?" "I don't. Not about you specifically." Lucian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But I care about opportunity. And you, Miss Whitcomb, represent a very particular kind of opportunity." The carriage was moving now, though Elara couldn't tell in which direction. Trees flashed past the windows, illuminated briefly by lightning before disappearing back into darkness. "I need a wife," Lucian continued. "Not for love, obviously. For strategy. Someone intelligent enough to navigate society, brave enough to stand beside me when things get dangerous, and they will, and desperate enough to agree to my terms without trying to negotiate for romantic sentiment that neither of us can afford." Elara stared at him. "You want to marry me. I want to offer you a contract." He picked up the envelope, held it out. "Marriage, yes, but not the kind you were planning with Ashford. This would be a partnership. I restore your family's fortune, elevate your status beyond anything you could have achieved with that spineless third son, and protect you from the social destruction that's currently being prepared by every gossip in 3 provinces. In exchange for what? Your presence, your intelligence, your willingness to be seen as mine." His smile turned sharp. "And occasionally, your participation in activities that polite society would find thoroughly objectionable. Illegal activities. Let's call them extra-legal." Lucien tilted his head. "I operate in spaces where the law is flexible, where power matters more than propriety. I need someone who can move through high society while understanding that real influence happens in shadows and back rooms. Someone who won't faint at the sight of blood or betray me the first time things become uncomfortable. And you think I'm that person? I think you're angry enough to consider it, smart enough to recognize a good deal when it's offered, and proud enough to prefer rebuilding yourself into something formidable rather than crawling home to beg your father for forgiveness you don't owe." The envelope sat between them, black wax gleaming. Elara's mind raced. This was insane. She didn't know this man, didn't understand his world, but what was the alternative? Return home to watch her family disintegrate around her father's debts and her mother's hysteria? Become a cautionary tale whispered about by women who'd once called themselves her friends? Fade into obscurity, maybe take a position as a governess or companion to some wealthy family, spending the rest of her life as invisible furniture in someone else's house? Marcus had tried to break her, had thrown her away like trash. This, whatever this was, felt like vengeance. "What's in the envelope?" she asked. "Terms. Read them. We'll discuss when you're ready." The carriage slowed, then stopped. When Lucien opened the door, Elara saw they were outside a townhouse she didn't recognize. Expensive neighborhood, discreet entrance, no lights visible from the street. "You'll stay here tonight," Lucien said. "My housekeeper has prepared a room. Food, dry clothes, anything you need. Tomorrow, if you agree to the terms, we'll announce our engagement." "Tomorrow? That's fast." "Yes." He helped her down from the carriage with a courtesy that seemed almost mocking, but necessary. "The gossip about tonight is already spreading. By morning, you'll be notorious. We need to control the narrative before it controls you." Elara stood on the cobblestones, soaked and exhausted, holding an envelope that contained either salvation or damnation. "And if I refuse?" Lucien's expression didn't change. "Then I wish you luck, Miss Whitcomb. You'll need it." He climbed back into the carriage without another word. The door closed, and the horses pulled away, leaving her standing alone in front of a stranger's house, her old life bleeding out behind her like the train of a ruined wedding dress. The front door opened. A woman in her 50s, dressed in severe black, regarded Elara with the kind of neutral assessment that reminded her forcibly of the Ashford butler's dismissal. "Miss Whitcomb, I'm Mrs. Thorne. His Grace thought you might need assistance. His Grace. The Duke of Viramont had just offered her marriage and called it a business arrangement, had appeared out of the storm like something conjured, had known exactly where she'd be and when, had prepared for this moment with the kind of calculation that should terrify her. It probably should. Instead, Elara felt something else entirely, something dangerous and new and sharp-edged. She followed Mrs. Thorne inside. The house was beautiful in an austere way. No excess decoration, everything functional but expensive. Mrs. Thorne led her upstairs to a bedroom that was easily twice the size of what she'd had at Thornfield, with a fire already burning in the hearth and dry clothes laid out on the bed. "There's a bath being drawn," Mrs. Thorne said. "I'll have food sent up. His Grace asked that you read the terms tonight, but says there's no pressure to decide until morning. No pressure. Except for the social catastrophe currently unfolding across the city, the creditors circling her family, the complete absence of any other option that didn't end with her destruction." "Thank you," Elara managed. Mrs. Thorne nodded and left, closing the door with a soft click. Alone finally, Elara set down her case and looked at the envelope. The black wax seal bore a crest she didn't recognize, something with wings and what might have been a sword or a spear, rendered in sharp, aggressive lines. She broke the seal. Inside, the terms were written in precise handwriting on heavy paper. No flowery language, no romantic pretense. Just facts, laid out with brutal clarity. Marriage contract between Lucien Viremont, Duke of Viramont, and Elara Whitcomb. Financial terms. The Duke agrees to settle all debts currently held against the Whitcomb family. Provide an annual allowance of £5,000 to Elara's parents. And establish trusts for her two younger sisters, ensuring appropriate dowries and education. Social terms. Elara will be presented as the Duchess of Viramont at all public functions. She will have complete authority over household management and entertaining. Her reputation will be protected through the Duke's influence and resources. Operational terms. Elara agrees to participate in the Duke's business ventures as needed, including but not limited to hosting gatherings for political purposes, gathering intelligence from social contacts, traveling on short notice, and maintaining absolute discretion regarding all activities. Personal terms. This is a marriage of alliance, not affection. Neither party expects or requires emotional attachment. Fidelity is expected in public to maintain appearance. Private arrangements are at the discretion of both parties. Duration. Permanent. Divorce is not an option, as it would destroy the strategic value of the alliance. Exit clause. If either party believes the contract has been violated, the matter will be settled through private arbitration. Breach of terms by either party results in complete forfeiture of all benefits. Elara read it 3 times. Each pass revealed new implications, new considerations. This wasn't a marriage proposal, it was a merger, a cold calculation of mutual benefit. And yet, her family would be saved. Not just saved, stabilized. Her sisters wouldn't pay the price for Marcus's betrayal. Her parents would have security, even if they didn't deserve it. And she would have power. Not the decorative kind she'd been taught to cultivate, but real influence. Access to rooms and conversations that shaped empires. The bath was ready. Elara sank into hot water that felt like a resurrection, washing away mud and rain and the last remnants of who she'd been 6 hours ago. That Elara had believed in love and happy endings, had thought being good and appropriate and perfectly behaved would earn her safety. This Elara knew better. She dried off, dressed in the clothes Mrs. Thorne had provided. Simple, but expensive, nothing like the fussy gowns she usually wore, and sat down at the writing desk by the window. The city sprawled below, lights scattered like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably celebrating, toasting his new fortune with the Bellamy heiress who'd bought him, congratulating himself on escaping an engagement that had become inconvenient. Let him celebrate. Elara picked up the pen Mrs. Thorne had left beside a stack of writing paper. The terms had included a space for her signature at the bottom, a single line that would change everything. Her hand didn't shake. She signed her name, Elara Whitcomb, in clear, bold letters. Then she set down the pen and felt something shift inside her chest. Not breaking, hardening, like steel cooling into its final shape. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." Mrs. Thorne entered, carrying a tray with soup and bread that smelled impossibly good. She set it on the desk, then noticed the signed contract. Shall I give this to His Grace? Please. The housekeeper's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Approval? Warning? Impossible to tell. He'll be pleased. The Duke values decisiveness. Does he value anything else? Mrs. Thorne paused at the door. He values competence, Miss Whitcomb, and survival. Those who prove themselves useful and resilient tend to thrive under his patronage. Those who don't— She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. When she left, Elara ate mechanically, her mind already racing ahead. Tomorrow, they'd announce the engagement. The gossip would shift from abandon to strategic alliance. People would whisper, would speculate, but they'd also recalculate. Because a woman backed by the Duke of Viramont wasn't someone you dismissed casually. Marcus would hear, would realize what he'd unleashed. Good. Elara finished eating and moved to the bed. The sheets were silk, the mattress perfectly firm. Everything in this house spoke of wealth deployed with precision rather than ostentation. No waste, no sentiment. She should have been afraid. Should have hesitated before signing herself over to a man she didn't know, whose reputation involved things whispered about but never confirmed. Instead, she felt calm, focused, like she'd been sleepwalking through her old life and had finally, violently woken up. The storm outside was weakening. Rain softened to a steady drum against the windows. Elara lay in the darkness, listening to it, thinking about the difference between falling and jumping. She'd been falling for hours, pushed off the cliff of her old life, tumbling through humiliation and rage and fear. But this? Signing that contract? That had been a jump. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 2. Elara closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, already dreaming of the woman she was about to become. The Duchess who would make Marcus Ashford regret every single choice that had led him to discard her. The woman who would stand beside a duke and learn to wield power like a blade. The version of herself who refused to break, who chose to rebuild as something far more dangerous than anyone expected. In the morning, everything would change. Elara Whitcomb was ready. Morning came too fast and too bright. Elara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant clatter of a city already in motion. For one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back with the weight of a landslide. The storm, the carriage, the contract she'd signed in the middle of the night like a woman possessed. She sat up, half expecting to find the room empty. The whole thing revealed as some fever dream brought on by exhaustion and humiliation. But no. The envelope still sat on the desk, her signature dried into permanence. The expensive nightgown she wore belonged to someone else's wardrobe. Everything was real. Terrifyingly, undeniably real. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Whitcomb?" Mrs. Thorne's voice came through the door. "His Grace requests your presence for breakfast. I've prepared clothing." Elara's stomach twisted. No more time to second guess. No retreat available even if she wanted one, which she absolutely did not. Definitely not. She was committed now, whatever that meant. The dress Mrs. Thorne had laid out was deep emerald green, cut in a style that managed to be both modest and striking, high-necked but fitted in a way that suggested confidence rather than demureness. Elara stared at herself in the mirror as the housekeeper laced her into it, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Her hair had been brushed into soft waves instead of the elaborate curls she usually wore. No excessive jewelry, nothing frivolous. She looked capable, serious, like someone who might actually survive what came next. "His Grace is particular about presentation," Mrs. Thorne said, adjusting the sleeves with expert precision. "You'll find he has strong opinions about most things. He appreciates directness over flattery, competence over charm. And if I possess neither?" The faintest smile crossed the housekeeper's face. "Then you wouldn't have signed the contract, Miss Whitcomb." The dining room was smaller than she expected, intimate, with morning light making the dark wood furniture glow amber. Lucien sat at the head of the table, already dressed for the day in clothes that probably cost more than her family's monthly expenses. He was reading a newspaper, coffee steaming beside him, and didn't look up when she entered. Elara hesitated in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. Should she announce herself? Sit? Wait for acknowledgement? "Stop hovering," Lucien said without raising his eyes from the page. "Sit. Eat. We have approximately 30 minutes before the first wave of chaos arrives. She sat. A servant materialized from nowhere, placing toast and eggs and fruit in front of her with practiced efficiency before vanishing again. The food smelled incredible, but her stomach was too tight to appreciate it. "What chaos?" she asked. "Your father." Lucien turned the page, still not looking at her. "He received news of your disappearance around 3 this morning. By 5, he was drunk and threatening to call the magistrate. By 6, he'd learned about our engagement through sources I made sure would reach him first. He'll be here within the hour, demanding explanations and probably trying to extract more money than what's already outlined in our agreement." Elara's hand froze halfway to her teacup. "You told him? Before telling me you'd told him?" "I told everyone." Now Lucien did look up, and his eyes were cold amusement personified. "The announcement went to every major household in the city at dawn. By now, half of polite society knows that the abandoned Whitcomb girl is engaged to the Duke of Viremont. The other half will know by noon." "You didn't ask. You signed the contract." He set down the newspaper with deliberate precision. "That was your consent. Everything that follows is execution of terms. I don't ask permission for strategy, Miss Whitcomb. I inform you of decisions and expect you to adapt accordingly. You need to understand that now, before we go any further." Heat flooded her cheeks, part anger, part something else she couldn't quite name. "I'm not your subordinate. No. You're my partner, which means you need to be sharp enough to keep pace with decisions made at speed." He leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "Marcus treated you like a pet. Pretty thing to show off, not expected to think or contribute beyond decoration. I have no use for that. You're intelligent or you're nothing to me. So prove it. What's the strategic value of announcing our engagement immediately rather than waiting?" The question hit like a test she hadn't prepared for. Elara's mind raced, sorting through implications. "Control," she said slowly. "You control the narrative before gossip does. I'm not the discarded bride. I'm the woman who caught the attention of someone more powerful than Marcus could ever dream of being." "Partial credit. What else?" "You undermine Marcus's position. He thought he was trading up by choosing the Bellamy fortune, but if I land a duke, it makes him look like he made a catastrophic error in judgment." "Better. And?" Elara met his eyes, understanding crystallizing. "You're sending a message to whoever might have had a hand in orchestrating my humiliation, that I'm protected now, that touching me means touching you." Lucian's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Full marks. Your family's financial collapse wasn't entirely accidental, Miss Whitcomb. Someone with political interests wanted the Whitcombs weakened and wanted Marcus aligned with the Bellamys specifically. By claiming you this publicly, I've just put myself directly in their path. Now they have to deal with me." "That sounds dangerous." "It is. Welcome to the partnership." Before Elara could respond, shouting erupted from somewhere deeper in the house. Her father's voice slurred and belligerent, even at this hour. Mrs. Thorne's measured tones trying to maintain order. The crash of something expensive hitting a wall. Lucien didn't even flinch. "Right on schedule. Shall we?" He stood, offering his arm with a courtesy that felt more like mockery. Elara rose on legs that wanted to shake, forced them steady, and took his arm. The muscle beneath his sleeve was solid, real. This was happening. This was actually happening. They found her father in the entrance hall, red-faced and sweating despite the cool morning air. He'd clearly dressed in a hurry, waistcoat buttoned wrong, cravat askew. Behind him stood 2 men Elara recognized as creditors who'd been hounding her family for months. "There she is!" Her father pointed an accusing finger, swaying slightly. "Ungrateful girl, running off in the night, making arrangements without consulting Mr. Whitcomb." Lucian's voice cut through the tirade like a blade through butter. "You're in my home, uninvited, making noise before I've finished my breakfast. This is already going poorly for you. I suggest adjusting your approach." Her father's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. The creditors had gone very still, clearly recognizing danger when it stood in front of them in an expensive morning coat. "Your Grace." Her father attempted a bow that nearly toppled him. "I merely came to ensure my daughter's well-being, to discuss terms of this sudden engagement. The terms are finalized. Your debts will be settled by close of business today." Lucien gestured to the creditors. "These gentlemen can confirm funds with my solicitor. Your daughter's trusts are already established. Your quarterly allowance begins immediately. In exchange, you will make no public statements about this engagement beyond expressing appropriate delight. You will not gamble away the money I'm providing, and you will never, under any circumstances, appear uninvited at any residence I occupy. Are we clear? But surely a father has the right. You have no rights here. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. You failed your daughter in every way that matters. I'm cleaning up your mess out of strategic necessity, not respect for your parental authority. Elara is under my protection now, which means she's beyond your reach. Consider this your only warning. Elara watched her father's face cycle through shock, anger, humiliation, all the emotions she'd felt last night, reflected back at her now. Part of her wanted to feel sympathy, wanted to soften this, to mediate between her father and this man she barely knew. But a larger part remembered every time her father had blamed her for his failures, every dismissive comment about women's place, every moment he'd treated her like currency instead of a person. I understand, Your Grace, her father finally managed, the fight draining out of him in the face of Lucien's absolute certainty. Excellent. Lucien turned to the creditors. My solicitor's office is on Barnard Street. Present your documentation, receive your payment. If I find you've inflated the amounts owed, I'll ensure you never conduct business in this city again. The men practically fled. Her father lingered, looking at Elara with something that might have been regret or might have just been self-pity. Elara, Goodbye, father. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Thank you for coming. The dismissal was clear. He stumbled out, Mrs. Thorne closing the door behind him with a finality that felt like the ending of something essential. Silence settled over the entrance hall. How do you feel? Lucien asked, turning to study her face. Elara took inventory, shaky, exhilarated, guilty, triumphant. I don't know, she admitted. That was my father. That was a man who failed you. There's a difference. He started walking back toward the dining room, expecting her to follow. You'll have time to process complicated emotions later. Right now, we need to prepare for the second wave. Which is? Marcus. Her stomach dropped. He wouldn't dare. He absolutely would. Pride is a powerful drug, Miss Whitcomb. He discarded you expecting you to disappear quietly. Instead, you've just become engaged to someone whose title and wealth make the Ashfords look like provincial farmers playing at nobility. He'll want to save face, which means he'll come here trying to paint this as some misunderstanding he can rectify. The idea of seeing Marcus again made her skin crawl. What do? We destroy him publicly. Lucien said it so casually he might have been discussing the weather. Not violently, that would be crude, but we're going to ensure that Marcus Ashford becomes a cautionary tale about the consequences of underestimating people you consider beneath you. They were interrupted by Mrs. Thorne, who appeared with the quiet efficiency of smoke. Your Grace, Lady Ashford and her son have arrived. I've shown them to the drawing room. Elara's heart kicked against her ribs. Lady Ashford, the woman who'd called her dear girl while planning to throw her away like trash. Lucien's smile turned predatory. Perfect. Elara, this is where you earn your position. Can you face them without falling apart? The question steadied her somehow. It wasn't sympathy or comfort, just a practical assessment of her capabilities. He needed to know if she could function under pressure. She thought of last night, standing in the rain with nothing, thought of the contract she'd signed, thought of the woman she'd decided to become. Yes, she said. I can face them. Then let's go remind the Ashfords what a mistake looks like. The drawing room was all calculated elegance. Dark greens and golds, furniture positioned for both comfort and intimidation. Lady Ashford sat ramrod straight on the settee, her usual warm expression replaced by something glacial. Marcus stood by the fireplace, trying to project confidence but succeeding only in looking cornered. Both of them stood when Lucien entered. Protocol demanded it. He was a duke, after all, but Elara noticed how their eyes slid past him, focusing on her with expressions that ranged from disbelief to poorly concealed panic. Lady Ashford, Marcus. Lucien didn't offer to shake hands, didn't gesture for them to sit, just stood there, radiating the kind of power that came from never having to justify himself to anyone. This is unexpected. Your Grace? Lady Ashford recovered first, producing a smile that probably worked in most situations but fell flat here. We came to discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding. There's been some confusion regarding Marcus's engagement to Miss Whitcomb. No confusion. Lucian cut her off. Marcus terminated his engagement. Miss Whitcomb accepted my proposal. The matter is quite clear. Marcus stepped forward, and Elara noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Elara, surely you understand this is all moving too fast. We've known each other for years. Whatever disagreement occurred last night can be resolved. You don't need to make rash decisions. Stop! The word came out of Elara's mouth before she consciously decided to speak. 3 pairs of eyes snapped to her. You don't get to do this, Marcus. You don't get to throw me away and then act concerned when someone else sees value you were too stupid to recognize. I made a mistake, Marcus said, trying for sincerity and landing somewhere around desperation. I see that now, but we can fix this. Your family, my family, we had plans. 5 years of plans. You had plans? Elara felt something cold and sharp settling in her chest, crowding out the fear. I had hopes that you turned out to be completely unworthy of. Do you know what you did last night? You didn't just end an engagement. You freed me from wasting any more of my life on someone who saw me as an accessory instead of a person. Lady Ashford's composure cracked. Miss Whitcomb, I understand you're upset, but surely you can see this engagement to His Grace is inappropriate. You barely know each other. The scandal, Lucian interrupted, is that your son tried to humiliate a woman under the assumption that she had no recourse, no protection, and no value beyond what he assigned her. That was his miscalculation. Not mine. Not Elara's. This is about money, Marcus said suddenly, anger replacing the false concern. That's all this is. You're trying to punish me by... You think very highly of yourself if you believe any of this is about you. Lucien's tone could have frozen water. I chose Elara because she's intelligent, resilient, and capable of functioning in environments that would destroy softer people. You chose to discard her because you're a coward who makes decisions based on immediate gain without considering long-term consequences. We are not the same, Marcus, and after today you're going to understand exactly how different we are. Is that a threat? Lady Ashford stood, trying to salvage some dignity. It's a guarantee. Lucian moved to stand beside Elara, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. A deliberate claim. I've already had conversations with several of your family's business partners. The Ashford shipping contracts in the northern provinces. Those are mine now. The textile agreements you were negotiating with the Merchants Guild. I've made better offers. Your political allies who you've been counting on for support in Parliament, they've suddenly remembered prior commitments. The color drained from Lady Ashford's face. You can't. I already have. Your family will survive, of course. I'm not interested in complete destruction, but you'll be diminished, weakened, made to understand that there are consequences for treating people as disposable. He paused, letting that sink in. And Marcus specifically? His reputation is about to become a cautionary tale. The man who was engaged to the future Duchess of Viramont and was too blind to see what he had. Society loves a fool, Lady Ashford. Your son is about to become their favorite example. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Father will fight this. He has connections. Your father is currently meeting with my solicitors, trying to salvage what's left of your family's standing. He's smarter than you. He knows when he's lost. Lucian turned to Elara, and his expression shifted slightly, still cold, but with something that might have been approval. Do you have anything you'd like to say to them? This was it. Her moment to choose. She could soften this, could try to ease the blow, could maintain the careful politeness she'd been trained in since childhood. Or she could burn the bridge so thoroughly there'd be nothing left but ash. Elara looked at Marcus, at the man she'd imagined spending her life with, who'd proven himself to be exactly as shallow and self-serving as she'd feared but refused to acknowledge. I hope the Bellamy fortune is worth it, she said quietly. I hope every time you look at your wife, you remember that you traded a partnership for a transaction. And I hope you spend the rest of your life wondering what you could have become if you'd been brave enough to value people over profit. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Lady Ashford recovered first, gathering her composure like armor. Come, Marcus, we've wasted enough time here. They left without another word, and Elara watched them go with a strange sense of disconnection. That was supposed to be her future. Those were the people she'd imagined building a life with. Thank the universe she'd been wrong. Well done, Lucian said once they were alone. You didn't cry, didn't apologize, didn't give them any opening to dismiss you as emotional or irrational. That was perfect. I don't feel perfect. Elara sank onto the settee they'd vacated, suddenly exhausted. I feel like I just set fire to everything I used to be. You did. And now we build something better from the ashes. He sat across from her, studying her with that unnerving intensity. The hard part starts now, Elara. Society knows about our engagement, but they don't believe it yet. We need to make them believe. That means public appearances, strategic social manipulation, and convincing some very skeptical people that this isn't just revenge or impulse. How do we do that? The opera. Tonight. We'll arrive together, sit in my box where everyone can see us, and we'll present a unified front that makes it clear this is real. Permanent. He leaned forward. They'll be watching everything. How you move, how we interact, whether there's genuine chemistry or just two people playing roles. You need to sell this, Elara. Can you do that? The question hung between them, weighted with implications she was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just about revenge on Marcus or saving her family. This was about stepping into an entirely different world, one where perception shaped reality and every interaction was a calculated move in games she barely understood. Teach me, she said. If I'm going to do this, I need to know the rules. Something flickered across Lucian's face. Surprise, maybe? Or satisfaction? The first rule is that there are no rules, only consequences. The second is that power respects power. You can't apologize your way into influence or charm your way into respect. You have to take it. How? By being so competent they can't ignore you, so confident they question their own assumptions, so sharp that underestimating you becomes obviously stupid. He stood, offering his hand. Come on, we have work to do before tonight. He led her to a study lined with books and maps, a massive desk covered in papers that seemed to track half the business dealings in the city. This is where I work. Where we'll work together once you're trained, but first you need to understand what you've actually signed up for. Lucian pulled out a folder, spreading documents across the desk. These are the people who orchestrated your family's collapse. Recognizing any names, Elara scanned the pages, her stomach sinking as familiar names appeared. Politicians, merchant lords, and at the center of it all, Lord Chancellor Pembroke? She looked up, shocked. He's one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. Yes, he wanted the Whitcombes removed as a moderate voice in regional politics, wanted Marcus aligned with the Bellamys because their father supports Pembroke's tariff policies. Your humiliation was just collateral damage in a much larger game. And by marrying me, you've made yourself Pembroke's enemy. I was already his enemy. Now I have an asset he didn't account for. Lucian's smile was absolutely predatory. You know these people, Elara. You've been to their parties, heard their gossip, understand how they think. That makes you valuable in ways they won't see coming. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Thorne appeared, looking mildly concerned. Your Grace, there's a situation developing. The Bellamy family has requested an urgent meeting. They're claiming breach of contract regarding Marcus's engagement. Lucian laughed, an actual laugh that sounded almost genuine. Of course they are. They paid good money for that alliance, and now it's worthless. He turned to Elara. Want to see how we handle threats? 20 minutes later, they sat across from Edmund Bellamy and his daughter Caroline, the woman Marcus had chosen over her. Caroline looked miserable, clearly understanding that this was a disaster. Her father, however, radiated entitled fury. This is unacceptable, Bellamy blustered. We had an agreement. Contracts were signed. My daughter's reputation— Your daughter's reputation is intact, Lucian interrupted. She's the innocent party here. Marcus is the one who broke his engagement, not her. If you want to sue someone for breach of contract, sue the Ashfords. But you swooped in like some kind of vulture. I offered protection to a woman who'd been publicly humiliated. If that threatens your business interests, perhaps you should have chosen partners more carefully. Lucien's tone could have cut glass. Now, you can continue making noise and drawing attention to how your family's fortune was used to buy your daughter a husband who was still emotionally attached to someone else. Or you can accept the situation, maintain dignity, and we can discuss alternative arrangements that might actually benefit you. Bellamy paused, greed warring with pride across his features. What kind of arrangements? I need suppliers for the northern expansion. Reliable ones. Your textile operations could fill that need, at rates favorable to both parties. Lucian pulled out another document, apparently having anticipated this exact conversation. Considerate compensation for the inconvenience. Elara watched the negotiation unfold, fascinated by how quickly Lucian turned potential enemies into business partners. Within 15 minutes, Bellamy was shaking hands and practically thanking him for the opportunity. When they left, Caroline lingered at the door, catching Elara's eye. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what it's worth. I didn't know about... Marcus said you'd ended things." "He lied." Elara kept her voice neutral. "But you're not responsible for his choices." Caroline nodded, looking relieved, and hurried after her father. "Generous of you," Lucian observed once they were alone. "Strategic. If I'm vindictive to everyone, I become the villain. If I'm selective about who I destroy, I become discerning." Elara surprised herself with how easily the calculation came. Caroline might be useful later. Her father certainly will be. Lucien's approving smile felt like winning something she hadn't known she was competing for. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Lucian's tailor arrived to fit Elara for appropriate Duchess-level clothing. His social secretary briefed her on who would be at the opera, what alliances mattered, which conversations to encourage, and which to deflect. By the time evening arrived, Elara's head was spinning with information, but she felt something like readiness settling in her bones. The dress they'd chosen was deep sapphire, cut to make a statement without being scandalous. Her hair was arranged in a style that managed to be both elegant and severe. When she looked in the mirror, she saw the woman she was becoming, sharp, dangerous, unbreakable. Lucien was waiting in the entrance hall, dressed in formal blacks that made him look like violence wrapped in expensive fabric. He looked her over with the same analytical assessment he'd given battle plans earlier, then nodded. "Perfect. Remember, they're going to stare. Let them. Don't flinch, don't explain, don't apologize for existing in their space. You belong there because I say you do, and I outrank everyone in that theater." The carriage ride to the opera house felt like traveling toward battle. Elara's hands wanted to shake, so she gripped them together in her lap, forcing stillness. "Nervous?" Lucian asked. "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let them see it." The opera house blazed with light, carriages lined up to disgorge their wealthy passengers. When their turn came, Lucien stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Elara down. The moment she appeared, conversation stopped. Literally stopped. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, whispers starting like wildfire. Elara forced herself to keep her chin up, her expression neutral, her hand steady on Lucian's arm as they walked up the stairs into the main hall. The crowd parted. Nobody spoke to them directly, but the stares were physical things, shocked, calculating, scandalized, intrigued. Elara caught sight of Marcus and Caroline across the hall. Marcus looked ill. Caroline just looked sad. Lady Pembroke, the Lord Chancellor's wife, stood near the grand staircase, her expression carved from ice. She didn't acknowledge them, but her eyes tracked their movement like a predator watching prey. "Smile," Lucien murmured as they climbed toward his box. "You're enjoying this." Elara smiled. It felt like baring teeth. They settled into the box. Prime location, center stage view, impossible to ignore. Below, the orchestra tuned. Around them, opera glasses turned their direction instead of toward the stage. "They hate me," Elara whispered. "They fear you. There's a difference." Lucien leaned back, completely comfortable being the center of attention. "Look at Lady Ashford, third balcony, trying not to cry. Look at Marcus, can't even enjoy the performance he's supposed to be attending. You did that, Elara. You took their power to hurt you and turned it into our advantage." The opera began. Elara tried to focus on the performance, but her awareness kept snagging on the weight of all those eyes. On whispered conversations happening in every box around them. On the delicious, terrifying reality of what she'd become in less than 24 hours. During the intermission, people actually approached them. Carefully. Respectfully. Offering congratulations that ranged from genuine to obviously calculating. Lucian handled each interaction with precision, making it clear that Elara was his equal in these conversations, not some decorative accessory. Then Lord Chancellor Pembroke himself appeared at the entrance to their box, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Your Grace, And Miss Whitcomb, or should I say the future Duchess, congratulations are in order. Pembroke. Lucian stood but didn't offer his hand. Enjoying the performance? Immensely, though I confess the drama off stage has been equally compelling. Pembroke's gaze settled on Elara with the weight of a threat. Such a sudden engagement. One worries about decisions made in haste. One should worry about underestimating people, Elara heard herself say. That seems to be an epidemic lately. Pembroke's smile froze. Indeed. Well, I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to become better acquainted in the future. He left, and Elara realized her heart was hammering. She'd just verbally sparred with one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. Beautifully done, Lucien murmured. You're learning fast. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of similar encounters, people testing her, probing for weakness, trying to determine if she was a real threat or just a temporary distraction. Each time, Elara found herself responding with confidence she didn't entirely feel, but managed to project anyway. By the time they returned to the townhouse, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. You survived, Lucian said as they entered the quiet entrance hall. More than that, you thrived. I'm impressed. I'm terrified, Elara admitted. Pembroke is going to be a problem. Pembroke is already a problem, but now he knows you're not going to be easy to intimidate. Lucian studied her for a long moment. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Elara climbed the stairs to her room, her mind still racing. She'd done it. She'd faced down society, stood beside a duke, and survived the crucible of public scrutiny. But as she changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, one thought kept circling back. Pembroke's eyes. The cold calculation in them. The promise of consequences for daring to interfere in his plans. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And somewhere out there, powerful men were already planning how to remove the inconvenient new Duchess before she became too dangerous to eliminate. Elara lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her, and wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant along with that marriage contract. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight brought only the certain knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross, made enemies who played games with lives as currency, and chosen a path that led either to absolute power or absolute destruction. No middle ground existed anymore. The answer came 3 weeks later in blood and gunfire on a frozen road 60 miles from the city. But the warning signs started appearing much earlier than that. Small things at first, easy to dismiss if you weren't looking for patterns. A letter from one of Lucien's business contacts that never arrived. A shipping manifest altered just enough to cause costly delays. Rumors circulating through the merchant districts about the Duke's unstable new fiancée who'd manipulated her way into his bed and his title. Elara had learned to recognize these tactics. Learned to track them back to their sources, like following breadcrumbs through a forest that wanted you lost. Pembroke's getting bolder, she said one morning, spreading intelligence reports across Lucian's desk. They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past weeks. Early mornings reviewing threats, afternoons navigating society events, evenings planning countermoves. It felt less like a marriage and more like running a small, efficient war, which, she supposed, it was. Lucian studied the documents without looking up. He's testing our defenses, seeing how we respond to pressure. We should respond by crushing him. Elara surprised herself with how easily that came out. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a woman who apologized for taking up space. Now she was suggesting political annihilation before breakfast. Tempting, but Pembroke has protection we haven't fully mapped yet. Move against him directly, we expose ourselves to retaliation we're not prepared for. Lucien finally met her eyes, and something like approval flickered there. You're learning to think strategically. Good. But strategy without patience gets people killed. So we just wait? Let him chip away at us? We gather information, build alliances, wait for him to overreach. He stood, moving to the window overlooking the garden. Pembroke's weakness is arrogance. He thinks we're playing his game. We need to change the rules without him noticing until it's too late. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Thorne entered carrying a sealed letter that made Lucien's expression shift into something cold and focused. From your northern estate, Your Grace. The messenger said it was urgent. Lucien broke the seal, read quickly, and swore under his breath. We need to travel. Today. What happened? One of my factories was sabotaged. Fire damage, 3 workers injured. The local magistrate is calling it an accident, but my manager says the evidence points to arson. He was already moving, pulling maps from a drawer. If we don't handle this personally, it'll embolden whoever's behind it. They'll see it as weakness. How long will we be gone? 4 days minimum. The estate is remote. Takes a full day of travel just to reach it. Lucian looked at her, assessing. This won't be comfortable. Winter roads, basic accommodations once we're out of the city, and there's risk. If someone's willing to burn a factory, they might escalate when we show up to investigate. Elara thought of the contract she'd been reading, the power dynamics she'd been learning to navigate. Thought of Pembroke's cold calculation and the certainty that this sabotage was connected to larger games being played. I'm coming with you, she said. I wasn't asking permission. You're my Duchess. Where I go, you go. That's part of the performance. He paused. But you should know what you're agreeing to. This isn't a drawing room negotiation. It's field work. Dirty, potentially dangerous, and definitely outside your previous experience. Good. I'm tired of drawing rooms anyway. They left within 2 hours, traveling in Lucien's reinforced carriage with 6 armed guards. The city gave way to countryside, then to wilderness as they pushed north into territories Elara had only seen on maps. The roads grew rougher, the settlements more sparse, the landscape harder and less forgiving. Lucien spent most of the journey reviewing reports and making notes in a leather journal he kept locked. Elara watched the world pass outside the windows and tried to ignore the growing sense that they were traveling towards something worse than a simple factory fire. They stopped at an inn the first night, a sturdy building that clearly catered to merchants and travelers heading to the northern provinces. The innkeeper recognized Lucien immediately, his nervousness obvious as he showed them to the best rooms available. Anything unusual happening in the area? Lucien asked, his tone casual but his attention sharp. Just the usual, Your Grace. Some labor disputes at the mines. Bandits been more active than normal, but nothing organized. The innkeeper hesitated. Though there's been strangers through here. Well-dressed men asking questions about your movements, claimed to be merchants, but they weren't. Lucien pressed a coin into the man's hand. If they come back, send word immediately. There's more gold in it if the information's timely. After the innkeeper left, Elara asked, Should we be worried? We should always be worried. The question is whether we're worried enough to turn back. Lucien poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle he'd brought himself, not trusting the inn's supply, apparently. How are you holding up? This is different from opera boxes and afternoon teas. I prefer it. Elara accepted the glass, surprised to find she meant it. At least out here, threats are obvious. In the city, everyone smiles while plotting your destruction. You're not wrong. He settled into a chair that looked barely sturdy enough to hold him. Tell me something. Do you regret it yet? The contract? The marriage? All of this? The question caught her off guard. Lucien rarely asked about feelings or second thoughts. Their partnership was built on mutual benefit and clear-eyed pragmatism, not emotional reassurance. No, Elara said slowly, testing the truth of it. I regret Marcus. I regret wasting 5 years on someone who saw me as property. But this? Even with the danger and the stress and Pembroke trying to destroy us, this feels real in a way that life never did before. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Not quite warmth, but something less cold than usual. I chose well then. You chose strategically. Whether that was well depends on whether we survive what's coming. He laughed. Actual laughter that sounded almost genuine. Practical and pessimistic. You're going to fit perfectly into northern politics. They traveled deeper into wilderness the next day. The guards grew more alert, hands resting on weapons as the forest pressed close on both sides of the narrow road. Elara felt it too, that sense of being watched, of entering territory where civilization's rules applied differently or not at all. The factory appeared around midday on the second day of travel. It sat in a valley carved by a river that powered the machinery, surrounded by worker housing and storage buildings, or what was left of them. One entire wing had burned, the skeleton of its frame still smoking despite the snow falling steadily around it. Lucien's manager met them at the gate, a hard-faced woman named Garrett who looked like she'd been born angry and had spent 40 years perfecting it. Your Grace, thank you for coming. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. 3 injured, none fatal. Fire started in the storage area around midnight, spread fast, too fast to be natural. Show me. Garrett led them through the damage, pointing out inconsistencies. Burn patterns that didn't match accident scenarios, locks that had been forced before the fire started, evidence of accelerants in areas that shouldn't have contained anything flammable. Someone wanted maximum damage, Garrett concluded, wanted to shut us down long enough to impact production contracts, and they knew the layout well enough to target critical areas. Inside help? Lucien asked. Maybe. Or good intelligence gathering. She handed him a scorched piece of fabric. Found this near where the fire started. Doesn't match any of our materials. Elara took the fabric, studying it. Fine weave, expensive. Not something a saboteur would wear unless... It's deliberate, she said. Someone wanted you to find this. Wanted you to know this wasn't random vandalism. Both Lucien and Garrett turned to look at her. Go on, Lucien said. If you're sabotaging a factory, you don't wear expensive clothes. You wear something disposable, something that won't identify you if you're caught. This was left behind on purpose. A signature. Elara felt the pieces clicking together. Whoever did this wants you to know they can reach your assets. They're sending a message about vulnerability. Garrett's respect was visible. Smart. She's right. This feels like a demonstration, not just destruction. They spent the afternoon interviewing workers, reviewing security measures, planning reconstruction. Elara found herself surprisingly useful. Her years of managing household accounts translated well to factory logistics, and her ability to read people helped identify who was genuinely shaken versus who was hiding something. By evening, they'd identified 2 workers with suspicious connections and recommended changes to security protocols. It felt productive, useful, like she was actually contributing rather than just performing the role of Duchess. You're good at this, Lucien said as they reviewed their findings in the factory office. Outside, snow had intensified into a proper storm. Most society women would be useless in situations like this. You adapted. Most society women were never thrown into a storm and told to survive. Elara organized documents into neat stacks, enjoying the simple competence of it. Besides, this is easier than navigating Lady Pembroke's garden parties. At least here, people say what they mean. Garrett stuck her head in. Storm's getting worse. Roads will be impassable by morning. You should stay here tonight. We've got quarters ready. The inn in town is an hour away through worsening conditions. Your Grace, I don't recommend it. Lucien looked at Elara, an unspoken question in his eyes. She nodded. They stayed. The quarters were basic but clean, 2 rooms connected by a shared sitting area. Workers had lit fires in both hearths, and someone had brought up a simple dinner of stew and bread that tasted better than most fancy meals Elara had endured at society dinners. The guards took positions around the building, standard security protocol. Nothing unusual, except Elara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Some instinct developed over weeks of learning to recognize threats made the back of her neck prickle. You feel it too, Lucien said. He stood at the window looking out at the storm-darkened landscape. We're exposed here. Predictable location. Guards spread thin because of the building layout. Elara joined him at the window. If someone wanted to make a move against us, this would be the opportunity. Yes, it would. His hand rested on the pistol at his belt. She'd noticed he'd started carrying it openly once they left the city. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. You need sleep too. I'll sleep when we're back in the city behind walls I control. He turned to look at her, and his expression was serious in a way she rarely saw. Elara, if something happens tonight, if we're attacked, you need to understand something. These people won't take prisoners, won't negotiate. If it comes to violence, it will be fast and final. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference. He moved to his travel case, pulled out a small pistol, and held it out. Do you know how to use one of these? Elara stared at the weapon. No. Then it's time you learned. He spent the next 20 minutes teaching her how to hold it, how to aim, how to fire without the recoil breaking her wrist. It was practical, efficient, completely stripped of drama. By the end, she could at least hit a target at close range. If someone comes through that door who isn't me or one of our guards, you shoot them, Lucien said. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just shoot. I don't know if I can kill someone. You won't know until you have to. He met her eyes. But I'd rather you have the option and not need it than need it and not have it. Elara took the pistol, felt its weight, and tried to imagine actually using it on another human being. The thought made her sick, but the thought of being helpless made her sicker. She retreated to her room, leaving the connecting door open so she could hear if anything happened. The pistol sat on the nightstand, gleaming in the firelight. Outside, wind howled through the valley, making the building creak and settle. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of half-formed anxieties. The explosion woke her. Not close, maybe 100 yards away, but loud enough to shake the building and send her bolt upright in bed, heart hammering. Shouts erupted outside. Gunfire cracked through the storm. Lucien burst through the connecting door. "Get dressed. Now. We're leaving." "What's happening?" "Ambush. They hit the guard barracks first, at least 3 down. More attackers than we have defenders." He was already moving, grabbing bags, weapons. This was planned. They waited for the storm, waited for us to be isolated. Elara dressed with shaking hands, pulling on clothes that were warm but not designed for running through snow. The pistol went into her pocket, its weight both terrifying and reassuring. More gunfire, closer now. Someone screamed, a sound that cut off with horrible abruptness. "How many?" Elara asked. "At least a dozen? Maybe more." Hard to tell in this weather. Lucien checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. "They're hurting us, burning our escape routes, forcing us toward the east side of the complex. That's a kill zone, open ground." He looked at her with something like pride. "You've been paying attention to tactical briefings. Yes, it's a kill zone, which means we don't go there. We go through the factory floor, out the riverside, and hope we can reach the carriage before they realize we've broken their pattern." The sound of breaking glass came from somewhere below, voices shouting orders in clipped military precision. "These aren't bandits," Elara said. "No, they're professionals, expensive ones." Lucien moved to the window, assessing. "Ready?" She wasn't. Would never be ready for this. But she nodded anyway because what else could she do? They moved fast and quiet through corridors that smelled of smoke and fear. One of their guards met them on the stairs, a young man named Perrin, who was bleeding from a cut above his eye. "Factory floor is clear for now, Your Grace, but they're closing in, maybe 5 minutes before they realize where you went." "Come with us," Lucien ordered. "Someone needs to slow them down. Give you time." Perrin's smile was grim. "Been an honor, sir." He turned back toward the fighting before Lucien could argue. They ran. The factory floor was a maze of machinery and shadows, made worse by the storm-cutting visibility to almost nothing. Elara's breath came in gasps that hurt her lungs. Her boots slipped on ice-slicked metal. Behind them, gunfire intensified, Perrin making his stand. The river exit appeared ahead, a heavy door designed to withstand flooding. Lucien hauled it open, revealing a landscape of white chaos. The storm had turned the world into a uniform blur of wind and snow and darkness. "The stables!" Lucien shouted over the wind. 200 yards northeast, stay close." They plunged into the storm. Elara had never been so cold. Snow plastered her face, got in her eyes, made every step a gamble against falling. Lucien's hand locked on her arm, dragging her forward when her own strength failed. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets snapped past, invisible in the storm, but audible in their passage. Someone had spotted them. Lucien returned fire without breaking stride, his shots more suppressive than aimed. "Keep moving!" The stables materialized out of the white, a dark shape that promised shelter. They crashed through the doors, startling horses that whinnied and stamped in panic. "Can you ride?" Lucien demanded. "Not well." "Good enough. We're not using the carriage. Too slow. Too visible." He was already saddling horses with quick, practiced movements. "You'll ride with me. Hold on and try not to fall off." The door behind them exploded inward. 3 men in dark clothes, weapons raised. Time slowed. Elara saw Lucien reach for his pistol, saw one of the attackers aim at him, saw the moment stretching out with crystalline clarity that contained only 2 choices, freeze or act. She pulled the pistol from her pocket, aimed at the center mass like Lucien had taught her, fired. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the attacker in the shoulder, spinning him around and ruining his aim. Lucien's shot took the second man in the chest. The third dove for cover, giving them seconds. "Move!" Lucien hauled Elara onto the horse, vaulting up behind her in one fluid motion. His arms came around her, grabbing the reins. "Hold on!" They exploded out the back exit into the storm. The horse ran like terror given form, hooves pounding through snow that got deeper with every stride. Elara clung to its mane, to Lucien's arms, to consciousness itself as cold and fear threatened to drag her under. Behind them, more gunfire. Shouts. The sound of pursuit that wouldn't stop until they were dead or safe, and safe was miles away through killing weather. "The road!" Lucien shouted in her ear. "If we can reach the main road, we can get to the way station." If. Such a small word to contain so much desperate hope. The horse stumbled, nearly went down. Lucien kept it upright through sheer skill and determination. They crashed through underbrush, over frozen streams, through forests that grabbed at them with skeletal branches. A shot cracked past Elara's head, so close she felt the air displacement. She turned, saw riders behind them. 3, at least, maybe more obscured by the storm. "They're gaining!" "I know!" Lucien urged the horse faster, but the animal was already giving everything it had. The forest opened suddenly onto the road. The way station sat a quarter-mile ahead, a fortified structure designed to protect travelers from exactly this kind of danger. So close, if they could just... The horse screamed, went down hard. Elara flew, hit the ground, tasted blood and snow. Pain exploded through her shoulder. The world spun sickeningly. Lucien was on his feet somehow, hauling her up, half carrying her toward the way station. "Come on, move!" She moved, somehow. Step after impossible step through snow and pain and terror that threatened to shut down her brain entirely. The riders burst from the forest, 50 yards to safety, 40, 30. Gunfire erupted. Lucien grunted, stumbled, kept moving. Elara felt something hot and wet on her hands where she gripped his coat. Blood. He was hit. 20 yards. The way station doors opened. People emerged, travelers, guards. Someone with a rifle who started returning fire. 10 yards. They crashed through the doorway into warmth and light and relative safety. Someone slammed the door, barred it, shouted orders. Elara collapsed against the wall, gasping. Her shoulder screamed, her lungs burned. Every part of her hurt. Lucien slid down beside her, hand pressed to his side where blood seeped between his fingers. His face had gone pale, but his eyes were alert, focused. "You shot someone," he said. "I know." "How do you feel?" Elara looked at her hands, bruised, bloody, shaking uncontrollably. Looked at Lucien bleeding beside her. Looked at the barred door that was all that stood between them, and people who'd tried very hard to kill them. "Alive," she finally said. "I feel alive." Outside, the attackers tested the defenses. Gunfire cracked against reinforced walls. Someone shouted orders about maintaining the perimeter. They'd survived. Barely. By margins measured in seconds and inches and split-second decisions that could have gone differently 100 ways. But Pembroke, because this was absolutely Pembroke's work, had just made a catastrophic error. He tried to kill them and failed. And now they knew exactly how far he was willing to go. The storm raged outside. Inside, Elara sat beside a bleeding Duke in a way station in the middle of nowhere, her hands still shaking from killing a man, and felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest where fear used to live. This was war now, not the polite kind fought in drawing rooms with cutting remarks and social maneuvering, real war, with real blood and real bodies and real consequences. And Elara discovered with something like surprise that she was ready for it. The way station physician was 70 if he was a day, with hands that shook from age or drink or both. He pressed a cloth against Lucien's side, tutting disapprovingly like this was somehow their fault for getting shot. "Bullet went through clean," he announced. "You're lucky. Half an inch to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "How long until I can travel?" Lucien asked through gritted teeth. "A week, maybe 2 if you want to avoid tearing the wound open." "We leave tomorrow." The physician's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Your Grace, I must strongly advise. Your advice is noted. We leave tomorrow." Lucien's tone allowed no argument. "Stitch it, bind it, give me whatever you've got for pain management that won't make me useless." Elara sat in a chair nearby, her own shoulder wrapped where she'd dislocated it in the fall. The physician had popped it back into place with a casual brutality that made her see stars, then dosed her with something that turned the pain into a distant, manageable thing. She should have felt triumph. They'd survived. Against coordinated, professional killers, they'd made it out alive. Instead, she felt cold, calculated, like something fundamental had shifted in her chest and hardened into stone. "You're too quiet," Lucien observed once the physician left. "Shock setting in?" "No." Elara looked at her hands, still shaking slightly, still stained with blood that wouldn't wash completely clean. "I'm thinking about who dies for this." A smile ghosted across Lucien's pale face. "There's the Duchess I married. What are you planning?" "Not planning. Not yet. But Pembroke tried to kill us, sent professionals, coordinated the attack, timed it perfectly." She stood, pacing despite her injuries. "That kind of operation requires money, connections, and absolute confidence that he'd get away with it, which means he thinks he's untouchable. He might be right. Pembroke has protection all the way to the crown. Moving against him directly would require evidence we don't have and political capital we haven't built yet. Then we don't move against him directly." Elara stopped pacing, turned to face Lucien. "We destroy the foundation he's standing on. His allies, his business partners, his sources of income. We make him so toxic that his own people turn on him to save themselves." Lucien studied her for a long moment. "That's not revenge. That's strategy." "It's both. Can it work?" "Yes. But it takes time, precision, and a willingness to be absolutely ruthless when opportunities present themselves." He shifted, wincing at the pull on his stitches. "You shot someone tonight, killed him probably. How does that sit with you?" The question should have been harder to answer, should have required soul-searching and moral wrestling. Instead, Elara found the answer came easily, cleanly. "He was trying to kill us. I'd do it again." She met Lucien's eyes. "Does that make me a monster?" "It makes you a survivor. There's a difference." He extended his hand. "Help me up. We need to start planning before word of our survival reaches Pembroke. Once he knows we lived, he'll either escalate or retreat. We need to be ready for both." They spent the next several hours reviewing everything they knew, mapping connections, identifying vulnerabilities. The way station's clerk provided paper and ink, clearly terrified but too afraid of Lucien to refuse. Outside, the storm finally began to break, though dawn was still hours away. "Pembroke's shipping interests," Elara said, spreading documents across the table. "He controls the tariffs on northern routes. That's where a lot of his political power comes from. He can strangle trade for anyone who opposes him. And he's used it. Half the merchant families in 3 provinces pay him protection money disguised as fair taxation." Lucien added notes to their growing diagram. "But those routes require cooperation from local governors. If we can turn even 2 or 3 of them, we fracture his monopoly, force him to negotiate instead of dictate." Elara felt pieces clicking together. "Who are the governors most likely to break ranks?" "Devon in the eastern province. His daughter married into a family Pembroke destroyed financially last year. He's looking for payback, but doesn't have the leverage to move alone." "What if we gave him leverage?" Lucien looked at her. "Explain." "Pembroke's using intimidation to keep people in line. But intimidation only works when you're the scariest thing in the room. If we publicly back Devon, make it clear he has our protection, it changes the calculation for everyone watching. Pembroke would see it as a direct challenge." "Good. Let him. He already tried to kill us. We've got nothing to lose by being obvious about our opposition." Elara pointed to another name on their list. "And here, Lady Marston. She controls the textile guilds and hates Pembroke's tariff policies. If we offer her favorable trade agreements through your northern routes, she gains financially by siding with us." "You're thinking like a politician. I'm thinking like someone who's tired of being hunted." Elara sat back, exhaustion beginning to creep in around the edges of the medication. "We make it expensive and dangerous to support Pembroke. We make it profitable and safe to support us. Eventually, the balance tips. Eventually could be months, years even." But Lucien didn't sound discouraging, just realistic. "Are you prepared for that? This isn't a quick revenge plot. It's a long game with no guaranteed outcome." Elara thought about Marcus, about her father, about every person who'd dismissed her as decorative and disposable. Thought about the sound of gunfire and the weight of a pistol in her hand and the split-second decision that had saved both their lives. "I'm prepared," she said. "The question is whether Pembroke is prepared for what happens when his victims stop being afraid of him." They left the way station at dawn despite the physician's protests. Lucien moved stiffly but competently, refusing to show weakness even though Elara could see pain tightening the corners of his eyes. She wasn't much better. Her shoulder ached with every movement, and her hands still wanted to shake when she thought too hard about what had happened. But they were alive. And more importantly, they were angry. The ride back to the city took 2 days instead of 1. Their pace slowed by injuries and caution. But it gave them time to refine their plans, to discuss tactics and prepare for the confrontation they knew was coming. News of the attack had reached the city before them. Of course it had. Pembroke would have made sure of it, probably spinning the story as a tragic accident or bandit activity, nothing to do with him. But the moment their carriage rolled through the city gates, everything changed. People stared, not with the idle curiosity from the opera, but with something sharper: recognition, calculation. The Duke and Duchess who'd survived an assassination attempt that should have killed them. That meant something in the currency of power. Mrs. Thorne met them at the townhouse door, her usual composure cracked just enough to show relief. "Thank the heavens you're safe. The rumors, half the city thinks you're dead, the other half thinks you're hiding." "We're neither, Lucien," Yen said, moving past her with the careful precision of someone managing pain. "Send word to everyone on our alliance list. I want meetings scheduled starting tomorrow. And get me everything you can find on Pembroke's recent financial activities. Every contract, every payment, every favor called in." "Your Grace, you need rest." "I need leverage. Rest can wait." Elara touched Mrs. Thorne's arm. "Please, we're fine. Better than fine, actually." The housekeeper studied her face, and something shifted in her expression. "You've changed, Miss Whitcomb. You look like I survived something that should have broken me?" Elara smiled without humor. "That's because I did." The next morning, their first visitor arrived before breakfast had even been cleared. Governor Devon, the man they'd identified as a potential ally, looking nervous but determined. Lucien received him in the study, Elara seated beside him in a chair that had been added specifically for this purpose. Equal partnership, visible to everyone who entered. "Your Grace, Duchess." Devon bowed, his eyes flickering between them. "I came as soon as I heard you'd returned. The attack in the north, I wanted to express my concern and offer whatever assistance." "You can stop performing," Lucien interrupted. "We know you've wanted to move against Pembroke for over a year. We know about your daughter, about the financial destruction of your son-in-law's family, and we know you've been looking for someone with enough power to back you when you finally make your move." Devon's face went through several expressions before settling on wary hope. "I'm listening." Pembroke's monopoly on northern trade routes is built on intimidation and carefully maintained alliances. But those alliances are fragile. If even one major governor breaks ranks publicly, it creates permission for others to follow. Lucien leaned forward despite the obvious discomfort it caused. "You break ranks. You publicly oppose his next tariff proposal. You cite your reasons: the economic damage, the unfair burden on merchants, whatever legitimate grievances you want to list. And we back you. Completely, visibly, financially if necessary." Pembroke would destroy me. He'd try, and he'd fail, because we'd make it our business to ensure you survive the retaliation. Elara spoke for the first time, drawing Devon's attention. "Right now, you're thinking about what you have to lose, but consider what happens if you do nothing. Pembroke continues his policies, your daughter's family never recovers, and you spend the rest of your career as someone who saw injustice and chose safety over action." Devon flinched. "That's harsh. It's accurate. We're not offering you a comfortable choice. We're offering you a meaningful one." Elara held his gaze. "Pembroke tried to kill us 4 days ago, sent professionals to do it. We survived, and now we're going to systematically dismantle everything that gives him power. You can be part of that, or you can watch from the sidelines and hope he doesn't notice your daughter's family connections when he starts looking for people to punish." The silence stretched. Devon looked at both of them, clearly weighing impossible options. "What exactly would you need from me?" he finally asked. "A public statement opposing his policies. Testimony about the coercion tactics he's used against governors who resist. Evidence of any illegal activities you've witnessed or been pressured to participate in." Lucien pulled out a document. "In exchange, we guarantee protection, favorable trade agreements through our northern facilities, and political backing in any future disputes. And if I refuse, then we thank you for your time and move on to the next potential ally. But we'll remember who stood with us and who didn't when the dust settles. Lucian's smile was cold. Neutrality isn't safe anymore, Devon. Pembroke made sure of that when he decided murder was an acceptable business tactic. Devon took the document, read it carefully, his hands shaking slightly. When he looked up, something had hardened in his expression, the look of a man who'd been pushed too far for too long. Where do I sign? They spent the next week meeting with similar potential allies, Lady Marston, who controlled the textile guilds, Baron Hendricks, whose mining operations competed with Pembroke's interests, merchant families who'd been squeezed by unfair tariffs, political figures who'd seen their influence eroded by Pembroke's machinations. Not everyone agreed. Some were too afraid, too invested in the current power structure, or too skeptical that Lucian and Elara could actually challenge someone as entrenched as the Lord Chancellor. But enough agreed, just enough to shift the balance. And then word reached them that Pembroke had requested a meeting. "He knows what we're doing," Elara said, reading the formal invitation that had arrived by courier. "He's trying to negotiate before we build enough momentum to actually threaten him. Or he's planning another attempt on our lives, just more directly this time." Lucien studied the invitation. Meeting at his estate, his territory, his terms. "We can't refuse. It would look like fear." "No, we can't." Lucien looked at her. "But we don't go unprepared, and we don't go gentle." They arrived at Pembroke's estate 3 days later, surrounded by guards and prepared for anything from negotiation to violence. The estate was massive, old money, old power, the kind of wealth that predated kingdoms and would probably outlast them. Pembroke received them in a drawing room designed to intimidate, high ceilings, expensive art, furniture arranged to put visitors at a psychological disadvantage. He stood as they entered, all practiced courtesy and cold calculation. "Your Grace, Duchess Veermont, how kind of you to accept my invitation." "Lord Chancellor." Lucien didn't sit, forcing Pembroke to remain standing as well. "You wanted to talk. We're here. Talk." Pembroke's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Straight to business. I appreciate efficiency." "Very well. It's come to my attention that you've been making certain arrangements, speaking with governors, offering alternative trade agreements, positioning yourselves in opposition to policies I've worked years to establish." "That's an interesting way to describe us refusing to die quietly when you tried to have us killed," Elara said. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the professionals who ambushed us in the north, or the factory sabotage that drew us there in the first place, or the coordinated financial attacks on the Whitcomb family that created the circumstances for all of this." Elara stepped forward. "You think we can't prove it? You're probably right. You're too careful for direct evidence. But we don't need proof, Lord Chancellor. We just need enough people to believe it. And surprisingly, when a duke and duchess survive an assassination attempt, people are very willing to believe their version of events." Pembroke's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, both of you. I have resources you can't imagine, connections that go beyond anything your title or wealth can counter. If you continue this path, you will be destroyed, utterly and completely." "Threats?" Lucian's voice was ice. "That's your opening negotiation position? You should have led with incentives." "Might have been more effective. I'm offering you a way out. Stop interfering with my interests. Withdraw your support from the governors who've suddenly found courage. Return to your comfortable lives and forget this vendetta." Pembroke moved closer, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "Do that, and I'll ensure no further accidents befall you." "Or?" Elara asked. "Or I demonstrate why everyone else in this kingdom eventually learns to stay out of my way." The silence that followed felt electric, charged with the promise of violence barely restrained. Lucien spoke first. "Here's our counteroffer. You resign your position as Lord Chancellor. You dissolve your monopolies on northern trade. You make public restitution to every family you've financially destroyed. And you do it within the month." Pembroke actually laughed. "Have you lost your mind? Or no? But you're about to lose everything." Lucien pulled out a folder, dropped it on the table between them. "That contains testimonies from 17 witnesses detailing your illegal activities. Coercion, bribery, fraud, and in one particularly interesting case, conspiracy to commit murder, not ours, someone else's from 3 years ago. Seems one of your former associates kept excellent records before he had his convenient riding accident. The color drained from Pembroke's face. That's impossible. Those records were destroyed. Most of them were. But your former associate had a wife who didn't appreciate being left penniless. She kept copies, hidden them for years, waiting for someone with enough power to actually use them. Elara smiled. We found her. Made it worth her while to share. This is extortion. This is justice. There's a difference. Lucien's voice was hard. You tried to make us victims. Instead, you made us survivors. And survivors have nothing left to lose, which makes them very dangerous to predators who rely on fear. Pembroke looked between them, clearly recalculating. If you release those testimonies, you'll start a political firestorm. Half the government has connections to my operations. You'd destabilize. We'd clean house. That's not a threat to us. It's the goal. Lucien picked up the folder. You have two choices. Resign and disappear quietly, keeping your life and some portion of your wealth. Or force us to release this information publicly and watch everything burn, including your freedom. We're comfortable with either outcome. You can't prove most of this in court. We don't need court. We need the court of public opinion. Elara stepped closer. You know how this works, Lord Chancellor. Even unproven allegations destroy political careers. And we have enough proven allegations mixed in with the questionable ones that no one will be able to dismiss it all as fabrication. You'll spend years defending yourself, watching your allies abandon you, losing everything piece by piece. Who do you think you are? Pembroke's composure finally cracked, fury bleeding through. You're nobody. A discarded woman and a duke with more ambition than sense. You think you can challenge the established order? You think you can survive what I'll bring down on you? We already did survive it, Elara said quietly. That's the part you keep missing. You had your shot, you failed, and now it's our turn. They left without waiting for a response, guards closing around them as they exited the estate. Elara's heart was hammering, adrenaline making her hands shake again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from exhilaration. He'll never accept those terms, she said once they were safely in the carriage. No, he won't. Which is why we've already started leaking the information to key journalists and political figures. Lucien's smile was fierce. Pembroke's going to fight, but he's fighting a battle he's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. Over the next 2 weeks, everything changed. The testimonies Lucien had mentioned began circulating through political circles. Journalists started asking questions. Governors who'd been silent suddenly found their voices, emboldened by the evidence that Pembroke's power wasn't as absolute as everyone had believed. Marcus's family suffered the collateral damage. Their connection to Pembroke's policies made them targets of public scrutiny they weren't prepared to handle. Elara watched from a distance as the Ashfords scrambled to distance themselves from the Lord Chancellor, throwing Marcus under social censure to save their own positions. Karma, she thought, had excellent timing. The breakthrough came during a parliamentary session 3 weeks after their meeting with Pembroke. Governor Devon took the floor and delivered a devastating testimony about coercion, illegal tariffs, and systematic abuse of power. He named names, provided documentation. And when Pembroke tried to interrupt, to discredit him, Lady Marston stood up and corroborated every word. Then Baron Hendricks. Then a dozen others, one after another, speaking truths that had been suppressed for years. Elara watched from the gallery, Lucien beside her, as the most powerful man in the kingdom was torn apart by the very system he'd corrupted. It's working, she whispered. It's working, Lucien agreed. But it's not over. Pembroke will retreat, regroup, try to salvage what he can. We need to keep pressure on him until he has nothing left to bargain with. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. The Crown itself, previously silent, issued a statement expressing deep concern about the allegations and announcing a formal investigation. It was political language, carefully neutral, but it meant something crucial. Pembroke's protection from the highest levels had been withdrawn. He was exposed, vulnerable, exactly where they'd wanted him. 2 days later, Pembroke resigned. The announcement came through official channels, dressed up in language about pursuing other opportunities and spending more time with family. But everyone knew what it really meant. He'd lost, and they'd won. The celebration that night was private, just Elara and Lucien in the study, reviewing documents and planning next moves because that's what they did now. worked together, built something that was equal parts partnership and alliance, and maybe, possibly, something more complicated than either of them wanted to name. Your family is secure, Lucien said, going through financial reports. Your sister's trusts are performing well. Your parents have stopped their public embarrassments. Marcus has been effectively exiled to the family's country estate. And Pembroke is finished politically. And you've expanded your northern operations, secured favorable trade agreements with half a dozen provinces, and positioned yourself as the reasonable alternative to corrupt power brokers. Elara added her own accounting. We both won. So why don't you look happy? Elara set down her pen, considering the question. Because I keep waiting for it to feel different. I thought victory would feel bigger, more definitive. Victory in politics never feels definitive. It just shifts the battlefield. Lucien leaned back, studying her. But you changed the game, Elara. 3 months ago, you were standing in the rain with nothing. Now you're the woman who helped bring down the Lord Chancellor. That's not nothing. We brought him down, together. Yes, we did. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Not quite warmth, but something less cold. I chose well when I offered you that contract. You've exceeded every expectation. That's not a compliment. That's a performance review. Can it be both? Elara laughed, surprising herself. I suppose it can. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Thorne entered, carrying a letter. This just arrived, marked urgent. Lucien opened it, read quickly, and his expression shifted into something dangerous. It's from Marcus. He's requesting a meeting, says he wants to apologize, to make amends for his actions. It's a trap. Probably, or he's desperate enough to actually believe he can repair some of the damage. Lucien looked at her. Do you want to see him? Did she? Elara turned the question over, examining it from all angles. 3 months ago, the answer would have been a desperate yes. Any chance to salvage the relationship, to make him see what he'd thrown away. Now? Now Marcus was just a man who'd made a catastrophic error in judgment and was living with the consequences. Not worth hatred, barely worth pity, certainly not worth her time. No, she said. Tell him the Duchess of Viremont is too busy rebuilding everything he tried to destroy. Tell him to send his apologies in writing if he feels the need, but we won't be meeting. Lucien's smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. I'll tell him exactly that. Later, alone in her room, Elara looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back bore little resemblance to the one who'd stood in the rain 3 months ago. This woman had scars, visible and otherwise, had killed someone, had survived assassination attempts and political warfare, and emerged not just intact but victorious. This woman was dangerous. And finally, gloriously free. Tomorrow they'd continue building, planning, positioning themselves for whatever came next. But tonight, Elara allowed herself to feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. They'd taken the man who'd tried to destroy them and reduced him to irrelevance. They'd turned victims into victors. And they'd proven that power didn't belong to the cruelest or the most ruthless. It belonged to those smart enough to use it strategically and brave enough to fight back when cornered. The game wasn't over. Would probably never be over in the world they inhabited. But for the first time since that night in the storm, Elara felt like she understood the rules. And better yet, she knew how to win. But winning the game and ending it were two different things entirely. The summons arrived 6 weeks after Pembroke's resignation. Delivered by royal courier in the kind of formal ceremony that meant someone very important wanted everyone to know this was happening. Elara watched from the study window as the courier dismounted, his livery bearing the crown seal in gold thread that caught the morning light. Palace, Lucien said, reading the invitation over her shoulder. The king wants to meet us, both of us. That's either very good or catastrophically bad. Elara took the heavy paper, studying the formal script. There's no middle ground when royalty gets involved. No, there isn't. Lucien moved to his desk, already pulling files. Pembroke still has allies at court, powerful ones who've been quiet while the investigation played out, but won't stay quiet if they see an opening to strike back. The king summoning us could mean he's impressed by what we accomplished, or it could mean someone's convinced him we're the real threat to stability. So we prepare for both. We prepare for both. They spent the next 3 days gathering intelligence, reviewing allies, making sure every possible angle was covered. Mrs. Thorne coordinated with contacts at court, mapping out who would be present and what their likely positions were. Garrett sent reports from the Northern Territories showing increased productivity and worker satisfaction since Pembroke's policies had been dismantled. Governor Devon and Lady Marston both sent letters pledging their support if needed. The night before the audience, Elara couldn't sleep. She paced her room, going over everything they'd learned, everything they'd built, trying to identify vulnerabilities they might have missed. A knock at her door interrupted the spiral of anxiety. "Come in." Lucien entered, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "Can't sleep either?" "Too much at stake. If this goes wrong, then we've already planned for that. We have contingencies, allies positioned to move if we're arrested or exiled or worse." He settled into the chair by her fireplace, looking tired in a way she rarely saw. "But I don't think that's what's keeping you awake." Elara stopped pacing. "What do you think it is, then?" "The same thing that's been keeping me awake. We're about to find out if everything we've built is real or if it only worked because Pembroke was overconfident and we got lucky." The honesty caught her off guard. Lucien didn't usually admit doubt, didn't show weakness or uncertainty. Their partnership had been built on competence and calculation, not emotional vulnerability. "Were we lucky?" she asked. "Partially, but we were also smart, and we worked harder than anyone expected us to." He met her eyes. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Elara, you should know something. This partnership, it's not what I expected when I offered you that contract. I thought I was getting a strategic asset. Turns out I got someone who's as stubborn and ruthless as I am, just better at hiding it behind social graces. Is that a compliment? It's respect, which is rarer and more valuable." Elara sat down across from him, studying his face in the firelight. 3 months of working side by side, surviving attempts on their lives, rebuilding power structures, and this was the first time he'd said anything approaching personal sentiment. "I hated you at first," she admitted. "That night in the carriage, when you laid out the contract like I was a business investment. I signed because I had no choice, but I resented every word of it. And now I understand why you did it that way. Sentiment would have been a lie. The contract was honest, brutal, but honest, and that turned out to be exactly what I needed." She paused. "I don't hate you anymore." Lucien's smile was small, but genuine. "Good, because I'm about to ask you something that requires you to trust me completely." "What?" "Tomorrow, when we meet the king, let me do most of the talking initially. Not because I don't trust your intelligence or instincts. I do, completely. But because there are court dynamics I've navigated for years, and one wrong word could turn allies into enemies." "You want me to be decorative and silent? That's not very Duchess-like. I want you to be strategic and observant. Watch reactions, identify alliances I might miss, and step in when you see an opening I don't." His expression was serious. "This isn't about control. It's about using both our strengths instead of duplicating efforts." Elara considered it. The old her, the one Marcus had tried to mold, would have been relieved to let someone else handle the difficult conversations. But the woman she'd become bristled at the idea of silence, even strategic silence. "I'll follow your lead," she said carefully, "but if I see something that needs addressing, I'm speaking up." "I wouldn't want it any other way." The palace was exactly as intimidating as Elara had imagined. Centuries of wealth and power made manifest in marble and gold. Servants moved like ghosts through corridors lined with portraits of rulers who'd shaped kingdoms and destroyed empires. Everything was designed to make visitors feel small, insignificant, temporary. But Elara had survived worse than architectural intimidation. They were shown to an antechamber where other nobles waited, all carefully not staring while obviously tracking every movement. Elara recognized faces from society events, some friendly, most neutral, a few openly hostile. Lady Pembroke sat in the corner, her expression carved from ice. Marcus's father stood near the windows, looking older and more defeated than when she'd last seen him. "The vultures are gathering," Lucien murmured. "They want to see which way the king leans before committing to a position. Let them wonder." The doors opened. A herald announced them, His Grace the Duke of Viremont and Her Grace the Duchess of Viremont, and they walked into the throne room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you'd already survived the worst anyone could throw at you. The king was younger than Elara expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat not on the throne but in a chair beside it, suggesting this was meant to be a conversation rather than a formal judgment. That was either a good sign or an excellent trap. "Your Graces," the king gestured for them to approach. "We've been following your activities with great interest. The Lord Chancellor's resignation, the restructuring of northern trade agreements, the rather dramatic events that preceded all of this. Quite the performance." "Your Majesty." Lucien bowed, Elara following his lead. "We live to serve the crown's interests." "Do you?" "Because from where I sit, it looks like you've been serving your own interests and accidentally benefiting the kingdom in the process." The king's tone was neutral, impossible to read. "Tell me, Duke Viermont, what exactly were you trying to accomplish by systematically dismantling one of my Lord Chancellor's power bases?" "Justice, Your Majesty." Pembroke had been using his position to coerce cooperation, manipulate markets, and eliminate opposition through methods ranging from financial destruction to— Lucien paused significantly. "More direct means." "These are serious allegations. Do you have proof?" "Testimonies from 17 witnesses, financial records documenting illegal activities, and evidence of at least 2 murders disguised as accidents." Lucien produced a folder, offering it to the king's secretary. "All documented and verified by independent sources." The king didn't look at the folder. "And yet you didn't bring these accusations to me directly. You chose to wage what amounts to a political campaign, turning my court into a battleground." This was the moment. The point where the king would either validate what they'd done or condemn them for overstepping. Elara watched the faces around the room, saw the predatory anticipation in Lady Pembroke's expression, the nervous calculation in others, everyone waiting to see which way power would flow. "Your Majesty," she said, stepping forward slightly. Lucien tensed beside her but didn't interrupt, trusting her judgment just as he'd promised. The king's attention shifted to her. "The Duchess speaks. Please, continue." "We didn't bring the accusations directly to you because we couldn't guarantee the message would reach you uncorrupted. Pembroke had people at every level of government, including positions close to the crown. Coming to you first would have given him time to suppress evidence and eliminate witnesses." Elara kept her voice steady, factual. "We chose the path that would ensure the truth came out, even if it meant taking political risks ourselves." An interesting rationalization. Some might call it treasonous, taking justice into your own hands rather than trusting the crown's institutions. Some might. But those institutions had been compromised by the very person we were investigating. Sometimes the system can't fix itself from within. She paused. "And with respect, Your Majesty, results speak louder than protocol. Pembroke is gone. His corrupt practices are being dismantled. Trade is flowing more freely. Workers who are being exploited have protection now. That's not treason. That's service to the kingdom, even if the methods were unconventional." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if the ground would hold. Then the king laughed. Actually laughed, breaking the tension like shattering glass. "Unconventional. That's diplomatic phrasing for what amounts to a coup against one of the most powerful men in my government." But his tone was approving, not condemning. "You've caused me significant headaches, both of you. Half my advisors think you're dangerous revolutionaries. The other half think you're exactly what this kingdom needs to shake off decades of corrupt practice." "And which half does Your Majesty agree with?" Lucien asked. "Both. Which is why I'm about to make your lives considerably more complicated." The king stood, and everyone in the room immediately bowed. "Duke Viermont, I'm appointing you to the position of Lord High Steward. You'll be responsible for overseeing trade policy, investigating corruption in government offices, and generally making sure no one else builds the kind of power monopoly Pembroke enjoyed." The room erupted in whispers. The position the king was offering was one of the highest in the kingdom, more power than Pembroke had officially held, with direct access to the crown and authority over vast sectors of governance. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but you'll accept because refusing would be insulting, and you're too smart to insult me in front of my entire court." The king's smile was sharp. "And Duchess Viermont, since you seem to have a talent for seeing through corrupt systems and mobilizing reform, I'm creating a new position for you, Royal Commissioner for Social Welfare. You'll investigate working conditions, advocate for policy changes that benefit common citizens, and report directly to me about issues that traditional channels might suppress." Elara's mind raced. This was unprecedented. A woman holding such a position, wielding that kind of authority. It would make enemies. would paint a target on her back even larger than the one already there. It was also exactly the kind of power she'd been learning to use effectively. I accept, Your Majesty. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. These positions come with expectations. You'll be scrutinized constantly, every decision questioned, every action examined for signs of the same corruption you fought against. The king's expression turned serious. You've proven you can tear down a corrupt system. Now prove you can build something better in its place. The audience ended shortly after, leaving Elara and Lucien to navigate a gauntlet of nobles who suddenly wanted to congratulate them, align with them, or subtly probe for weaknesses. Lady Pembroke swept past without acknowledgement, her defeat absolute and visible. Lord Ashford attempted to approach, but was intercepted by one of their allies, who'd clearly been positioned for exactly that purpose. Marcus himself was nowhere to be seen, probably still exiled to the country estate, watching his former fiancée become one of the most powerful women in the kingdom while he rotted in irrelevance. The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, Elara just felt tired. They made it back to the townhouse by late afternoon, both exhausted from hours of political performance. Mrs. Thorne had already heard the news, of course she had, and had champagne waiting along with a stack of messages from allies offering support and enemies couching threats in congratulatory language. To unconventional methods, Lucian said, raising his glass. To surviving long enough to see them work, Elara countered, clinking her glass against his. They drank in companionable silence, the weight of new responsibilities settling around them like armor. They were still learning to wear comfortably. This changes everything, Elara said finally. These positions, they're not just titles. They're actual power to reshape policy, to challenge old systems. And actual targets on our backs for anyone who benefited from those old systems. Lucien set down his glass. The king just made us the most visible reformers in the kingdom. Every corrupt official, every exploitative merchant, every noble profiting from unfair practices. They're all going to be watching for opportunities to discredit or destroy us. Good. Let them watch. Let them try. Elara felt that familiar coldness settling in her chest, the one that appeared whenever someone underestimated her. We've already survived assassination attempts. Political maneuvering seems manageable by comparison. You've changed. Lucian's observation wasn't criticism, just fact. The woman I offered that contract to would never have said something like that. That woman doesn't exist anymore. She died in a storm 3 months ago. Elara met his eyes. This is who survived. Over the next several weeks, they threw themselves into their new positions with the same intensity they'd brought to destroying Pembroke. Lucien restructured trade agreements, investigated suspicious government contracts, and quietly removed corrupt officials from positions where they could do damage. Elara toured factories and mines, documented abuses, and drafted policy proposals that made powerful people very uncomfortable. They worked as a team, sharing information, coordinating strategies, covering each other's blind spots. The partnership that had started as a business transaction had evolved into something more effective than either of them had anticipated. Respect, Lucien had called it. Elara was starting to think it might be something deeper than that. The confrontation with Marcus came unexpectedly, 6 weeks into their new positions. Elara was reviewing worker safety reports when Mrs. Thorne announced he'd arrived, requesting a meeting. He's persistent, I'll give him that, Elara muttered. Fine, show him in. But I want you nearby in case he's stupid enough to try something. Marcus looked worse than she'd imagined. Thinner, older, with the kind of defeat that came from watching your entire life collapse because of decisions you couldn't take back. He stood in her study now, not some borrowed space, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Elara, thank you for seeing me. Duchess Viramont, she corrected. We're not familiar anymore, Marcus. Say what you came to say. He flinched. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For how I treated you. For the engagement. For trading me like livestock when someone with more money came along. Elara didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. For throwing me out into a storm and expecting me to disappear quietly. For underestimating me so completely that you handed me to someone who actually saw my value. I made a mistake. A catastrophic one. I see that now. No, you see the consequences now. That's different. Elara set down her papers, giving him her full attention. You see that I became someone important while you became irrelevant. You see that your family lost status and influence while mine recovered. You see that the life you thought you were securing by choosing the Bellamy fortune turned into exile and social death. I loved you, Marcus said, and he actually sounded like he believed it. I know I didn't show it, but I did. I just thought, you thought I was an acceptable option until something better came along. And when it did, you didn't hesitate. Elara stood, moved to the window. Here's what you need to understand, Marcus. I don't hate you. I'm not even angry anymore. You're just a man who made a choice, and that choice had consequences you weren't smart enough to anticipate. That's not my problem to fix. Is there anything I can do? Any way to make amends? Live with what you've done. Learn from it if you're capable. And never, ever contact me again. She turned to face him. You wanted a transaction. You got one. It just didn't end the way you expected. Marcus left without another word, and Elara watched from the window as his carriage pulled away. She waited for some feeling, triumph, satisfaction, closure, something to mark the official end of that chapter of her life. Instead, she just felt ready to move forward. The final piece fell into place 3 months after their royal appointments, at a gala celebrating new trade agreements with the eastern provinces. Every important family attended, along with foreign dignitaries and merchants eager to benefit from the reformed policies. Elara wore deep crimson, the color of the royal commissioner's office, chosen deliberately to remind everyone exactly who she was now. Lucien stood beside her, equally formal, both of them performing the roles they'd been given while actually doing the work those roles demanded. Governor Devon approached with his daughter, both smiling genuinely. Duchess Viremont, the worker protection laws you proposed just passed the provincial council. Unanimous support. That's excellent news. Thank you for your advocacy. The workers are thanking you. Conditions have already started improving in the eastern mines. He lowered his voice. There are already whispers about extending similar protections kingdom-wide. You're starting a movement. Lady Marston joined them, her textile empire thriving under the new trade policies. I heard rumors that someone tried to bribe the royal commissioners last week. Something about overlooking safety violations in exchange for political support? They tried, Elara confirmed. I had them arrested. Turns out the king doesn't appreciate corruption in the offices specifically created to fight corruption. You're making enemies faster than you're making allies, Lady Marston observed. Good. The right enemies are better than the wrong allies. The evening progressed with similar conversations, people testing boundaries, seeking favors, trying to determine how much power these new positions actually held. Elara and Lucien navigated it all with the ease of practice, supporting each other's initiatives, presenting a unified front that made it clear they weren't targets to be picked off individually. Near midnight, the king himself approached, which caused every conversation within 20 feet to immediately stop. Commissioner, Lord High Steward, a word? They followed him to a private balcony overlooking the palace gardens, away from the crowds and performance of the gala. I wanted to speak with you privately about the trajectory of your reforms, the king began. They're working. Better than I'd hoped, actually. But they're also disrupting established power structures faster than some of my advisors are comfortable with. Are you asking us to slow down, Your Majesty? Lucien asked. I'm telling you to be careful. You've made remarkable progress in a short time, but sustainable change requires building support structures that can survive political shifts. If I die tomorrow, or if my heir doesn't share my reformist tendencies, I need to know your initiatives won't be immediately dismantled. Elara understood what he was really saying. You want us to embed the reforms so deeply into law and practice that reversing them becomes politically impossible. Exactly, which means training others to carry on the work, building institutions, not just policies, creating a legacy that outlasts individual rulers or commissioners. That's a longer game than we've been playing, Lucien said. Yes, but you've proven you can win short games. Now prove you can win the long one. After the king left, Elara and Lucien stood in silence, looking out at gardens designed by monarchs long dead, thinking about legacies and what survived beyond individual lifetimes. He's right, Elara said finally. We've been reactive, responding to crises, fighting immediate battles. We need to think decades ahead, not months. That requires something we haven't really discussed. Lucien turned to face her. Permanence. Commitment beyond the contractual terms we started with. Elara's heart kicked against her ribs. They'd carefully avoided discussing what their partnership meant beyond professional alliance. The contract had specified marriage without affection, strategy without sentiment. But somewhere along the way, that had stopped being accurate. "What are you suggesting?" she asked carefully. "I'm suggesting that what we've built works because we trust each other, because we're honest about capabilities and limitations, because we've survived things that should have broken us and came out stronger." He paused. "The contract was about mutual benefit, but I think we've become something more complicated than that." "What would you call it?" "Partnership. Real partnership. Not just strategic alliance." Lucienne's expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. "I didn't expect to respect you the way I do. Didn't plan on actually enjoying working with you. Definitely didn't anticipate caring what happened to you beyond how it affected my interests." That sounds dangerously close to sentiment. It is, which is inconvenient and probably unwise, but also apparently unavoidable. He smiled slightly. "You once said you didn't hate me anymore. Is there any chance you've progressed beyond neutral tolerance?" Elara thought about the past months, the battles fought, the victories won, the moments of genuine connection buried between strategic planning sessions. Thought about how she'd started anticipating his reactions, trusting his judgment, finding herself wanting his approval, not because it was professionally necessary, but because his opinion mattered. "I think we've progressed beyond most things the contract specified," she admitted. "The question is what we do about it. We could revise the contract, add personal terms to the professional ones. Or we could acknowledge that some things don't need contracts, that trust and respect and whatever this is developing into work better without formal documentation." Lucien considered that. "You're suggesting we just see where this goes, without predetermined terms or exit strategies?" "I'm suggesting that the best parts of our partnership have been the things we didn't plan for, the moments where we adapted instead of following scripts." Elara moved closer. "I spent 5 years in an engagement that was all contract and no connection. I'm not interested in repeating that, even with better terms. So what are you interested in?" "Building something real. Messy and complicated and probably difficult, but genuine." She met his eyes. "I think we're already most of the way there. We just haven't admitted it." The kiss happened without planning, without calculation, without any of the strategic thinking that had defined their relationship. It was impulsive and honest and felt like finally acknowledging something that had been building since the night in the carriage when he'd offered her a choice between destruction and survival. When they pulled apart, Lucienne was smiling in a way she'd never seen before. Genuine pleasure without the usual edge of calculation. "That was unprofessional," he said. "Completely inappropriate for royal commissioners," Elara agreed. "We should probably establish some boundaries." "Absolutely. Very important." Neither of them moved apart. Below them, the gala continued. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns that had guided kingdoms and witnessed the rise and fall of empires. And between them, something new was being built. A partnership that had started as survival and evolved into something neither of them had names for, but both recognized as worth protecting. A year later, Elara stood in the same study where she'd first read Lucien's contract, reviewing proposals for kingdom-wide worker protection legislation. Her office had grown. She now had a staff of 12 dedicated to investigating abuses and drafting reforms. The position that had seemed like a political gesture had become one of the most influential in the kingdom. Lucien's reforms had been equally successful. Trade was flourishing under fair policies. Corruption investigations had removed dozens of officials who thought themselves untouchable. The economic benefits were visible even to common citizens who rarely paid attention to government policy. Together, they'd become exactly what the king had gambled on. Reformers effective enough to change systems, careful enough to build lasting structures, and powerful enough that opposing them became politically dangerous. The door opened. Lucien entered, looking tired but satisfied. "The eastern provinces just ratified the new safety standards. Governor Devon says implementation will start next month. That's 8 provinces now, more than half the kingdom. And momentum building for the rest." He sat beside her, reviewing her notes. "The king is pleased, says we've exceeded expectations." "We have a tendency to do that." They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from months of partnership so effective it sometimes felt like reading each other's minds. The contract that had started their relationship sat in a drawer somewhere, irrelevant now except as a reminder of how far they'd come. Elara's sisters visited regularly, both thriving in schools paid for by the trust Lucien had established. Her parents had stabilized, her father sober more often than not, her mother rebuilding social connections without the desperate edge of financial panic. The Whitcomb name had been restored not through marriage to Marcus, but through Elara's own accomplishments. Marcus himself had disappeared into rural obscurity, reportedly married to a local merchant's daughter and managing the family's struggling country estate. Exactly the life of mediocrity he'd been so desperate to avoid. Pembroke had fled the kingdom entirely, his assets seized, his name a cautionary tale about corruption and overreach. Some of his former allies had tried to resist the reforms, but they'd found themselves increasingly isolated as the new systems took root. Lady Pembroke had attempted one last political maneuver 6 months ago, trying to use old connections to discredit Elara's worker safety initiatives. She'd failed spectacularly, and her reputation had never recovered. Last Elara had heard, she'd retreated to a country estate, bitter and forgotten. "You're smiling," Lucien observed. "What are you thinking about? How much has changed? A year ago I was standing in the rain with nothing. Now I'm reshaping labor policy for an entire kingdom. Having any regrets?" "About which part? The marriage that wasn't really a marriage? The assassination attempts? The political warfare?" "Any of it." Elara considered the question seriously. "No. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, made me into someone who could actually accomplish things instead of just surviving them. I wouldn't trade that." "Good. Because I'd hate to think I rescued you from one bad situation only to trap you in another." "You didn't rescue me. You gave me tools and opportunities. I did the rest." "We did the rest," Lucien corrected. "This only worked because we worked together." That was true. Neither of them would have achieved half as much alone. Their partnership, professional and personal, had become the foundation for everything else they'd built. Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm. Workers benefited from protections that hadn't existed a year ago. Merchants operated under fair trade policies instead of corrupt monopolies. Common citizens had channels to report abuses and reasonable expectation that complaints would be investigated. It wasn't perfect. Corruption still existed. Exploitation still happened. But systems were in place now to address it, to push back against it, to make it less accepted and more risky. Change was happening. Slowly, messily, imperfectly. But happening. And at the center of it, two people who'd started as strangers bound by contract had become partners in reshaping a kingdom. Elara looked at Lucien, this man who'd appeared in a storm and offered her a choice between breaking and rebuilding, who'd seen potential where everyone else saw damaged goods, who'd pushed her to be sharper, stronger, more ruthless in pursuit of justice. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For the contract, for seeing what I could become instead of what I'd been reduced to, for partnership instead of patronage." Lucien's smile was soft, genuine. "You've thanked me for that before." "I know, but I mean it more now, because I understand what it cost you to take that risk, to trust me with actual power instead of just the appearance of it. Best investment I ever made." They returned to work side by side, building the future one policy reform at a time. The woman who'd stood in the rain that night, broken, abandoned, supposedly ruined, she was gone, had been transformed by fire and blood and strategic warfare into someone new, someone dangerous, someone effective, someone who'd taken her own destruction and rebuilt it into power that reshaped kingdoms. The Duchess of Viremont, Royal Commissioner for Social Welfare, was a legend now. People told stories about her, about the woman who'd been cast aside and had returned as an architect of reform, about the partnership between Duke and Duchess that had toppled corrupt chancellors and rewritten the rules of power. Some of the stories were even true, but the truth that mattered most was simpler than legend. Elara had chosen to survive instead of break, had chosen to fight instead of accept defeat, had chosen partnership with a dangerous man over safety and obscurity. And those choices had changed everything. For her. For Lucien. For a kingdom that was slowly, imperfectly, learning that power belonged to those brave enough to use it for something beyond personal gain. The storm that had started everything was long past. But its legacy remained. In reform policies, in protected workers, in a woman who'd learned that falling could become flying if you were willing to spread your wings and jump. Elara had jumped, and she'd learned to soar.